The tabulators got to look at it. They made the decisions. They happen to be employees of Unified. They went to the judges. Hey, we got a bad one here, or we have one that's questionable. And then the judges made the decision. And of course, the attorney for Unified that was hired and the campaign attorney were overlooking. And George is standing there saying, "Hey, I'd like to look at something."
Yeah.
It's Monday morning. I'm Dr. Ken Jorgen, and I'm here with my two good buddies, George Myers.
Morning.
And Jim Spodek.
Morning.
And we're going to talk about the referendum that was on the ballot in early April. April 7th was the day it was.
That they allegedly won by 5 votes.
We firmly believe, I mean, we've looked at a lot of evidence here now, and we firmly believe that that referendum was defeated. Now, the message out in public has been that the referendum won, and that the recount confirmed that it had won. We are not buying that. And neither are some plaintiffs here in the city of Racine, one of whom is you, George.
Yeah, I represent hot government that is challenging it, but I also like to think that it's another 15,000 people, too.
Yeah, well, it's you, and it's Jim Sewell.
Yeah, Jim Sewell with the Libertarian Party,
and Dennis Monte, who represents the Taxpayers Association.
And we filed a complaint. And in the
Racine County Circuit Court.
Yeah, and right in the complaint, we asked the court to determine there were more no votes than yes votes in the referendum. So yeah. we have reviewed the numbers.
So you came right out of the box and you say, we don't think you guys won.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
So we wanted to present evidence in the court.
Yeah,
correct.
Now let's go back and review the recount a little bit, because I'm sure everybody who reads the newspaper or listens to the gossip around town realizes that there was a recount, and a recount typically is an unbiased reevaluation of an election to determine if the official or the announced result is in fact what should be considered the official result.
One thing I'd like to throw in there too, it's a little bit misleading to say it's a recount, because it's more than just counting things. It's also determine what gets counted.
That's absolutely correct.
We're going to be looking at this more closely.
Because you examine ballots, and particularly in the instance of absentee votes, you look at the envelopes that the ballots came in, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's take a look at the actual structure of this recount. Because you would think when there's a recount that goes on, that it would be a bunch of unbiased, disinterested people who would take charge of this and look at all of this in a very, very objective way and not allow their emotions or their context to be an influence on this whatsoever. So let's talk about who did the recount.
Yeah, in the recount.
Yeah. Now there's a board of canvassers.
Well, can we start one step earlier with the actual voting at where the clerk gets the ballots?
Go ahead, George.
Right.
Okay.
Because you first have an election.
Right.
All right.
And it's the clerk and the poll workers that work that, and people should have that distinct from some of these other people that come up in the recount. I just want to make sure.
Oh, it's an entirely different group.
Yeah, that's right. So you have the clerk and the poll workers are the first ones to look at ballots,
and they do it on the day of the election. Basically they count up all the ballots. They say we had this many voted this way, this many voted that way. Here's the raw numbers. It all goes into a central location.
Right.
They add them all up and they say this one, that lost, this one, that lost, this guy's elected, this guy, nice try.
Right. Now, when it came to these absentee ballots, though, it got a little more complicated because...
Well, let's talk about the players first.
Okay.
Let's talk about the recount team.
Okay.
And the board of canvassers they're like the referees. They decide anytime there's anything questionable going on, and in particular in this election, one of the things that was most questionable was the envelopes that the absentee ballots came in.
Right.
Now they are the ones that decide what should be done, if anything, when there's a question about one of those ballots or one of those envelopes.
Right.
Who are those three people? Well, it turns out that they're all high-level employees of Racine Unified School District. the executive assistant to the superintendent, executive assistant to the chief financial officer, and the director of human resources. These are all high-level positions with the Racine Unified School District, and they were the board of canvassers.
The judges.
They're essentially referees, if you put in a sports analogy. They decide who made the right move, who made the wrong move. Yep.
All right, now you've got the tabulators, who are basically the people in charge of counting. They do the raw counting. You know, they take all these pieces of paper and they count them up, and they say, this is the number that we got saying yes, and this is the number we got saying no. Okay, who were the tabulators? Well, it turns out 16 of the tabulators were unified employees. 2 of the tabulators were related to teachers. And there were 7 reps, 7 tabulators from Caledonia, Sturtevant, and Wind Point.
A total of 25 that were hired by a unified school district. 16 of them were actually paid employees of Unified.
Right.
2 of them were related. Yeah. So, I mean, it was heavily balanced to the unified school district. They counted, they judged it, and they assumed.
Well, yeah, I mean, and we're not saying that these people did anything wrong or that they had any biases, but how can you not? And whether that played a role in how this was finally analyzed, well, there's some questions there. But the tabulators, they count the ballots and they examine the ballot envelopes for review. The ballot envelopes being only those ones that were involved in absentee votes. Okay, now there's also a third party involved here, and that is the attorney hired by Unified to act as the coordinator, the one who orchestrates and advises on this whole process. So you want to have a legal mind there. This is somebody that was hired by Unified, and he was the go-to guy whenever there was a legal question. It was brought to him. And he kind of like oversaw the whole thing. And
he basically ran it.
Yeah.
He determined where he was. This was Matt O'Neill, the lawyer. Where he was, that's where the action was. Now, a lot of times, as we'll get into a little more detail here in just a minute, there was important action going on over at the tabulators. They were doing more than just counting, but we'll cover that in just a little bit. But so there were 10 tables out there where the coordinator was where the heavy action was. You had to be there. But over and behind the scenes at the 10 tables, often there were other things going on between the tabulators and sometimes even the board of canvassers, the referees. They'd be over there too.
Okay, now the final people that were involved here, of course, is the petitioners. You were one. And there was another petitioner who represented Unified School District, basically.
He was basically on their side. Yeah. That was the
Yes for Kids.
Yes for Our Children.
Yeah. He was an attorney, and he was hired by Unified. He was also a petitioner, which gave him a little bit more rights. The petitioners had more rights than just observers.
He was on Unified side. He wasn't hired by Unified. He was paid for by Yes. You know, the Yes for Children.
Oh, okay.
Had a lot of money too. Remember? Yeah. We find out who was behind Yes for Children.
That was the one that sent in all the literature that you got at your house. 10 different Yes for Kids, Yes for Kids, Yes for Kids. That was the campaign arm of Unified that went out to promote this referendum.
Nice looking flyers too. We showed several of them on the show.
They had a lot of money to spend.
They had a lot of money.
We'll be finding out how much money they spent when those figures come out.
Well, we kind of got a rough idea. Because we know how much postage is, we kind of got an idea of how much printing costs, et cetera, et cetera. But until we get the final figures, our estimate is somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 was spent on promoting this campaign.
Right.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Now, one of the questions I want to bring up now, you've got the Board of Canvassers, Unified High-Level Administration. You have the tabulators, which are the primarily employees of the Unified School District. You have an attorney hired by the Unified School District, actually quarterbacking the whole thing. You then have the campaign portion of the Unified School District's campaign portion, having an attorney who also is a petitioner to oversee, to make objections if they feel like possibly some of the other petitioners, you and the other two, make something that they feel. So they were smart to put someone in like that.
It was.
Yeah.
But then you, as a petitioner, had to stand 6 feet back, actually had tape around the table. So you never really could see any of the action that was going on. And of course, there were 10 tables with all this activity, counting and making determinations, as I think you called them the gatekeeper, the tabulators.
Yeah, but to understand that, I'd like to go back to the actual process that a ballot takes, an envelope takes that originally contains a mailed-in ballot,
Okay.
and follow that through. And now we're going to see how these roles are played. When this ballot gets cast or mailed in, it's first viewed by the clerk of that municipality. It'd be the clerk in Caledonia, Racine, Mount Pleasant, Wind Point, wherever it is. They're the first person to actually look at the ballot or look at the envelope. They don't look at the ballot yet. They will look at the envelope, and if the envelope takes the requirements, or it has the requirements needed to be properly voted, properly cast and used, then they will accept it. Now, I don't think it's going to be too complicated. Just go through those requirements. It's pretty easy. It's on the instructions. Any of you that voted absentee should be able to understand this. Number one, if you voted that way, you had to sign that envelope. It had to be your signature on it. Number two, it had to be witnessed. And the witness had to sign their signature and put their address. Those are 3 things. And the 4th thing is, it had to be mailed in time.
Mm-hmm.
So the clerk would receive that envelope and would check for those 4 things. If they were all there properly, then she would open it up, and eventually it would be taken out and that ballot put in the machine, and it would be cast and voted.
Which is pretty straightforward. But in this election, it got more complicated. And the reason for that was the COVID-19 situation, where there was initially an extension for how much time was going to be allowed, and then it was retracted by the Supreme Court. In other words, you didn't have to have it in on the day of the election. Remember, they had said, well, we're going to give an extra week because of all of this craziness that's going on with COVID. Then the Supreme Court said, no, they got to be in on time. And then there was also the question of what about the social distancing? If you had very, very grave concerns about having a witness be close to you, signing your ballot envelope, and you couldn't get anybody to do it, or you were afraid to have somebody do it, you could put COVID-19 down on the witness blank. But then that was disallowed later on.
That was good for 1 day.
Yeah, it was just crazy. I mean, there was all these adjustments made, and then there was adjustments to the adjustments and accommodations. It just became very complicated.
This is important. Even if you don't understand all that, at least you can see it was complicated.
Yeah.
So the clerk would make a decision with all this stuff going on, with changing the days. The clerk would make a decision of whether or not to use that ballot. And they made a simple decision, either yes or no. Now, if they decided to say yes, we're going to use that ballot, the envelope would be opened up, the ballot would be cast, but the envelope was stored. It was kept there, just in case. If it wasn't used, then it was not opened up, the ballot was never taken out of the envelope, and that was put into another envelope and stored that way. Now, that's real important to understand it. You had 2 kinds of envelopes there now. You had opened envelopes where the ballot was gone. You don't know where that ballot went. You go try and find that ballot again for this person. You can't do it because it's not marked. It's gone. It's in the pile. The other kind of envelope, the ballot is still in the envelope. So if you could actually open it up and find out how that person voted if you wanted to. All right. So there are 2 kinds of envelopes, and when you go to now you go to the recount. Normally that's it. That's the end of it. You count it up. Election's over. You forget about it. But this was only a 5-vote difference, so it got challenged. Right. So now we're going to look at those envelopes again to make sure that it was right. And this is where the importance of the tabulators come in, because normally you think of them just counting votes, but it's more than just voting now. We call them gatekeepers, because they will look at those Unopened envelopes, they hardly look at them. Those automatically go to the referee. All the unopened ones where they weren't voted, where the clerk had said no, the tabulator just passes it on to the referee and they're going to check it out. But how about the ones that were used? Did the clerk do the right job? And the first person to look at those are the tabulators. And we call them the gatekeepers because they look at that envelope and they make a decision. And if they decide, clerk did all right, never looked at again. Never goes beyond that.
That's a very key part of the whole equation.
Part of it. That's right. If the tabulator though says, I have a little question about this one, I don't know if that was properly cast, then it goes on up to the referees, to the board of canvassers, and they decide it. So we call them the gatekeepers because those are all unified school district employees, by the way.
Yes.
All right. So so it goes on up to the board of canvassers, and then the board of canvassers make the final decision. And here's another important part. A lot of the clerk's decisions are reversed. Sometimes they're reversed because the clerk let it go and they shouldn't have let it go. There was something missing on that ballot. How could you let this go? The voter didn't even sign the envelope, but the clerk let it go. All right. That gets reversed. Sometimes the clerk blocked it. Well, everything looks fine in the envelope to me. Witness signature, voter signature, witness address, passed in time. Why'd they do that? Okay, they reverse that decision, and then they will take it out, and they will go ahead and cast that ballot. So the votes go up and down depending on what the gatekeepers look at and depending on what the referees say. So they're more than just ballot counters now. They're actually making decisions at each one of those levels. And who is making the decision and what their interests are, we can kind of question because there's some other things we looked at and they...
One of the areas...
And I know you... Yeah, you go ahead. I was going to make a comment, but go ahead.
One of the areas that when you talk about when you go through these envelopes, certain districts voted heavily for the referendum. Some districts voted heavily against the referendum. It just so happens when you graph this out, the fact that the questionable tabulators decided to question quite a bit in Caledonia. They were heavily voted against, I would say heavily 60-40, against the referendum.
That's pretty heavy.
Yeah, but now... all of a sudden, we're going to check a lot of those different ballots. So
they challenged a lot of the empty envelopes. In other words, the place that have been cast, they're saying, "Wait a second, we think the clerk might have made a mistake with this."
Mm-hmm. And what happened when they went to Racine?
Yeah, well, Racine hardly any were challenged.
Yeah. So I'm going to put the graph on. I'm going to put it on the screen. You can take a look at it. You can see in the beginning here, the red is these are challenged envelopes. But as you
challenged used envelopes.
Used envelopes.
Right.
Yeah. So now they're saying, well, we don't know if this was actually a ballot. Now we go into the city. As you're following this along, you can see where the city is. Some municipalities are wards. Some of those wards, they had no challenges.
I don't see any red at all. So you see a lot more red in the
Caledonia couldn't figure out how to do the ballots, but in Racine, no problem. See, so was it orchestrated that way? I don't know. But the fact is, there certainly were a lot of challenges done in Caledonia and not in Racine, where they would have picked up extra ballots.
And by the way, that's largely the role of the gatekeepers. That's the tabulators. They're the ones that will take those out and say, we want to challenge them. If they don't challenge it, nobody else looks at it. And here comes another important part of our whole appeals process. We... The petitioners, that was Jim Sewell with the Libertarian Party, Dennis Monte with the Taxpayers Association, me with Hot Government, we wanted to look at those envelopes in Racine. We wanted to look at the opened envelopes that had been used.
Well, certainly
because we're noticing
none of them are being challenged.
Yeah. They told us we could look at them. Well, they promised we could look at them.
Sure.
And we got extra people there to look at them. I think, Doc, you even showed up.
I was there.
Yeah. We had 8 people there. And by the way, this is in our complaint.
It's 10 people. It's
in the complaint that we brought them there on Thursday, and there were no envelopes to look at.
And what was the report from the team, the recount team?
Well, they'd already looked at them.
We already did that. Don't worry about it.
Here's another point I want to make. When we broke this down a little bit, now I know there's a lot of numbers in this, and there's a lot of, I mean, it's the stack of minutes. This is this big, and I give you a lot of credit, George, you and Jim and Dennis, because there was a lot of work put into this to kind of break down each of these minutes and decipher what was actually done. But one of the things when the graph came up, another area was out of the 18, let's just say, people that had some association, or if they were not employees, with Unified, there were 7 other people down there that did tabulators. And I would say, I think 3 were from Caledonia, 1 was Mount Pleasant, or maybe 4 Caledonia, Mount Pleasant, and Sturtevant. When they did the tabulation, they did not do Caledonia. I think maybe Sturtevant got done, but the other areas. What happened was they were doing other areas, Mount Pleasant, but the Caledonia folks were doing some of Mount Pleasant. The city of Racine tabulators, or the employees of Unified, did the Caledonia wards. Mm-hmm. So they looked at this rather than
the people from Caledonia would be most likely. So they might have even been poll workers. Now,
right.
That's what we want to make the distinction.
These were folks that were associated with Caledonia in some form or another, but they did not do. They did some wards of Caledonia, but the majority of those wards were done by.
Personally, I think.
So overall, they did very little of the recount. Actually,
pretty much, yeah. I mean, they didn't anywhere near what the employees of Unified.
When you went through those 10 tables, there were maybe 2 or 3 that were not Racine Unified School District employees, and of course, you get up to the main table, it's all unified. It's the board of canvassers, which I call the referees. See, they're the ones that are making these decisions, and like we said, they're challenging what the clerk said. So when you get the referees who are on one side of the team. And go imagine a football player, Chicago Bears versus Packers, and the referees
Packers
are all
will kill the Bears.
Well, there's another way to do it though. Is suppose all the referees were Bears players.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly.
And that's essentially what they had, And the other thing was that where we, if you go to the football analogy, we never got the ball. Our team, they always had the ball. The only way we could do it, the only way we could win is hopefully every time they made a move, we would make them lose, and finally they'd fumble the ball in their own end zone, and we'd get a safety.
Yeah,
2 points.
but that's all. We never got the ball. We couldn't make a touchdown.
So let me just recap, George, a little bit. So you wanted to look at the envelopes. You did not look at the envelopes.
We're not looking at that's a
and that was a key point to this whole. The tabulators got to look at it. They made the decisions. They happen to be employees of Unified. They went to the judges. Hey, we got a bad one here, or we have one that's questionable. And then the judges made the decision. And of course, the attorney for Unified that was hired and the campaign attorney were overlooking. And George is standing there saying, "Hey, I'd like to look at something."
Yeah,
is this how it was placed?
That's what it was. As a matter of fact, I asked you to look at the envelopes, and I think I can even find this on the video, where he said, I realize, he's explaining to the poll work to the tabulators there what I wanted to do, and I realize this is going to increase interminably the length of time to do this. And
do you want to do it?
Yeah, but you have to let him do it because he has a right to do it. See, that's what they told me. And I said right there, Matt, I can do it in 5 minutes. It's not a big, long thing. The only problem was, the only time I could do it was when they're looking at envelopes. And most of the time, they're counting things. They're counting these things, which I have no interest in doing. When they're counting, all they're doing is, matching up with what the machine told them from the ward. The money come in from the voters, from the clerk. Here's what the count is, and you hand count. You better get it the same because that machine doesn't make a mistake counting.
Well, there were some instances where we were allowed to look at ballots. I remember.
Oh yeah, we got to look at some of them.
It was a matter of
envelopes.
Envelopes, yeah.
Okay.
But the situation was such that you could stand in a couple feet back and look over the shoulder of one of the tabulators. And they would go through the envelopes one at a time, and you could just glance at it for a couple of seconds.
That's all you could do. It's got 2 seconds.
See if there was information on those 3 lines. Well, you had no way of taking
You couldn't turn it over and look and make sure the postmark. You didn't get to look at the postmark.
Right, and you didn't even know if the name, the signature was matching the name.
That's
right. There just wasn't enough time.
How about would you call it a bit of
And matter of fact,
Sam?
when they were reviewing the envelopes, one of them came out, and it was obvious that the person that signed it was not the voter. It was a very different name. So we knew the stuff was there. We wanted to see it, but we weren't allowed to see it. And when we brought in those extra people, we did look at some envelopes. I've never claimed we didn't look at any envelopes, but we wanted to look at all the envelopes. And we thought we had a right to do it.
Well, you did have a right to do
and by
it,
law,
and
you
you
do
were
have a
promised
right.
that you would be able to see it.
And the point I bring out about how Matt introduced me at that time, saying it would increase interminably, was the opposition we were constantly confronted with. We were always the interference. We were always the people obstructing the process of the thing. And we didn't belong there. It was their ballot, their referendum, their recount. Stay away. You're causing us problems.
Well, Jim brought that point up. He said, I thought, I went into this thinking that it was going to be a completely open.
You're talking about Jim
honest,
Sewell.
Yeah, completely open and honest, untainted recount seeking the truth, when in fact it turned out to be an adversarial process.
It was.
Where you guys were looked upon as being intrusive and disruptive, just because by virtue of the fact that you asked for the recount and wanted to watch.
Okay, George, let's get to the meat of the complaint. There were inconsistencies in how those votes were added, and you feel, or the team feels, that those were added incorrectly.
Yeah,
there was a number of
in fact,
wards.
One real simple thing, we were supposed to take away 3 no votes and 1 yes vote. We're supposed to reduce it by that. I mean, things went up and down. You understand that? Well, when we looked at the tally, they took the no votes down by 4. So 4 with that. What the heck is that all about? Why is it so wrong? See, it was enough of the decision making that you would take away no and 3 and 1, but then with all the confusion, and I think I don't know why they just applied them all to one side. But the point is there's a lot of challenges to that, and we think there were enough errors like that if corrected would give us more no votes than yes votes, and we would have actually won that referendum.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I remember. I was down there the day when you mentioned that Sturdivant, that the numbers were wrong.
Oh,
They had the
up
numbers
on the board.
They
were putting
had
up
the
on
numbers
the board.
from the original count, and then they put in another column the numbers from the recount. And when they put the recount numbers down, they didn't jive with what
I had counted, which
and what they had announced. And we asked him, why do you have those numbers up there? Those are not the right numbers.
I told him they're wrong, and he said,
that's not the official numbers.
Yeah, he said, we're just putting that for public information so people kind of have an idea how the balloting's going, but that's not official.
So how hard is it to wipe something off of a whiteboard and put down the real numbers? So and it turns out that at the end of the day, at the end of the game, the numbers that they put up there that they admitted were not correct were the ones that they used.
That's right. I was just utterly amazed when it came up to the totals because it was exactly what had been on the board.
But here's the thing: there's a number. If you go through the complaint, I mean, there's 3 or 4 pages of different wards, different areas of the city, the county, or Mount Pleasant and Caledonia that have definitely been challenged, and there's a number of them, and you feel pretty good about it.
Yeah. I think our biggest problem is going to be with a judge that has got to make a decision like that. Going up against Unified and all the money that's involved with pushing this thing forward.
Okay, I got one other, just a couple more things. Absentee ballots. Is it a good idea? I mean, what I saw there was this is an absolute disaster. This is an avenue for fraud. I just don't see absentee ballots being a good way to vote. Because I mean, even there were some problems, like you mentioned, Doc, about the particular problems they had in Wisconsin this time. But man, if you don't sign it, if you don't do certain things on that absentee ballot, it gets handled by a third party. I don't see it being a way to go.
In fact, one of the examples that came up in the referendum, they found 9 votes that had not been cast.
Yeah.
Well, how easy would that have been just to, if it hadn't been for the recount, they never would have used them.
Yeah.
Never would have used them. It was when they came up to the recount that they discovered these 9 ballots that were in envelopes that were properly signed and sealed and all that type of stuff were never used. So it just open wide for fraud. Anybody wants to cheat, it makes it easier for cheaters to cheat. Let's just put it that way. The absentee ballot, rather than you go to the poll, you get a ballot, You fill it out, and you take it over and put it in the machine.
See,
instead of going through 3 or 4 hands before that happens.
I differ with you on this. I think that there is a way of managing a mail-in vote. They haven't achieved it yet in a way that is satisfying to me, that it's done with great integrity. I think the idea of having one day for an election is a bad idea. I think the idea of having, like if you've got half a dozen candidates and you're running a primary, instead of breaking it down to just 2 people, I like the idea of instant runoff voting. There's a lot of different ways that we can improve on our election system. This is not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination, and it varies across the country.
And you're going to try to use a ways through a system, the United States Post Office, that is far, far from being perfect. I mean, it's got a long ways to go. And here's the problem I have with the. Here's the problem I have. You said your say. Now I'm going to have my say. Here's the problem I have with the one-day vote. We talk about all this importance in voting, my right to vote, but you can't set aside one day to exercise that right and make sure that it's done right. I would say that says that the people that can't get out there, people don't think it's important enough to get out there. They're too lazy, too tired, too busy.
George.
I didn't interrupt you when you said it.
You could have.
They're too tired to get out there and go out and vote, because that's the way you keep it simple. That's the way you keep it honest.
And I'd like to bring
and
one
that's the way
thing
you
up.
reduce down the fraud.
When you bring in a situation like Racine has, when you've got the mayor of the city of Racine injects himself into the Unified School District referendum, the way Tory Mason did it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you really think the integrity, when you talk about integrity, Doc, here it is, right out in the wide open. Now you've got the mayor, the Yes for Kids, who are now the aldermen in the city of Racine, and you find a number of people involved in this. And then we look at the numbers when we look at this tabulation that is completely out of whack. When you got 5 and it ends up 4, is that an accident, or is that just like, well, gee, they're not going to miss a vote because your stack's that high? And if these guys didn't go through that one by one, hour upon hour, we're talking about $1 billion referendum. We've got a real problem here, and this is very, very important. I just want to make that point.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, this is way too, this is just too massive to allow this to be decided by pure luck or
employees of an organization that's going to benefit.
But
I want to go back
the
to
will of the voters went way out the window. It was only 5 votes.
Oh,
we
yeah,
we had like
no way.
90 drawdown, 90 times where we were changing these votes based on what the clerk said and what the referee said and what and what the luck of the draw was. I mean, it's
I want to stand up for a lot of people who are unable to vote for one reason or another. I mean, if there's somebody that's working overtime and got kids coming home from school, et cetera, both members of the family, both the father and the mother have to work. I mean, there are people for whom voting on election day in a timely manner is very, very difficult. So, yes, there are some people that are too lazy to participate. I totally agree with you.
Or don't care enough. They don't even really know who to vote. Somebody sells them on the idea. You got to get out there and vote. It's
beyond
important.
that, it's very.
Who should I vote for?
Vote
for this one.
It's very difficult for some people, and it should be made.
Well, I have voted absentee, but back in the day, it goes back 50 years. So one time I voted absentee, but I had to go into the clerk, write down why. Okay.
I don't like it. Just what I saw.
Okay.
What I saw with absentees and the determination that are being made, and it only came out because of the recount.
Well,
otherwise,
the system needs to be worked on. I totally agree with you, but the idea of just
maybe if you have a couple day voting or whatever, make it a little bit more easy. But I'm going to tell you one thing. If you win, George, I'm bringing champagne, just like they did down at the recount.
And with that, we're getting the heck out of here. I hope that we simplified this enough where you can understand it, because it's a very complex issue, and we've puzzled over it a long time. Maybe you guys are brighter than we are, and you got it like that, and you got this all figured out. But we hope that we brought some information to you that you can use, and that you know that this process is not over yet. and it's going to continue on for a while.
And we're talking about this particular
This
election,
particular
not the
recount, yeah.
absentee voting. We're talking about now the.
Well, that ain't decided either.
That's another whole issue. But yeah, this particular thing is not over yet, and it should not be treated lightly by any judge anywhere. I would really like it seen taken out of Racine, City of Racine,
Yeah.
for because I think it really needs to be. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Okay, I'm trying to say goodbye here.
Okay, goodbye, folks.
Jim,
Bye.
see you next week.